Friends, next weekend I'm going to be at the Helium Comedy Club in Buffalo, New York. Hare Krishna, thank you God. I can't wait to see my Buffalo heads. I'll be there Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Come see me.
Friends, and welcome to the DTFH. Today's guest is the author of this awesome book, Tripped, Norman Ohler. And whoa, this book blew my mind. You know, I thought that I knew the history of LSD roughly. Gets synthesized by Albert Hofmann at Sandoz Laboratories, gets bought up by the CIA, tested in universities, and then just sort of flows into default reality and shapes the minds of so many maniacs and philosophers and artists that there's too many to name. But whoa, after this conversation with Norman, I realized that I had missed a very dark piece of the LSD story. Sandoz Laboratories had a pretty insane skeleton in their closet, and it looks like Norman Ohler is bringing that skeleton into the light. You're going to find out this incredible part of the history of LSD on today's conversation, and also you should definitely check this book out. It's incredible. Tripped, Nazi Germany, the CIA, and the dawn of the psychedelic age. It's everywhere, and you should order it. The writing is just amazing, and Norman is so freaking cool. So, everybody, welcome to the DTFH, Norman Ohler. Norman, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a great pleasure, actually, to be here and have this long time to talk about stuff, I guess.
I'm excited. You have written it's as though God contacted you and said, write a book for Duncan Trussell. This covers everything. And it starts off mentioning somebody who had a massive influence on me, not philosophically, not intellectually, but chemically. Pickard. He manufactured 94% of the LSD during the 80s, 90s. And so if you were taking acid...
It's probably Pickard's.
Is it Pickard or Pickard? I've been saying Pickard.
And Pickard.
Your audiobook narrator says Pickard.
Oh.
And it confused me.
No, it's Leonard Pickard.
That's how I always remembered because of Star Trek.
Yeah.
But had to be an homage to him.
Because he's also a man who boldly goes where no man has gone before.
I know, that can't be an accident.
The essence of LSD, basically.
Exactly. And what a beautiful way to start this book, because you also, in your book, talk about how insane it is that a man who did nothing more than manufacture a substance that at one point we thought was going to transform the planet for the better was given 2 life sentences for doing nothing and for helping me and God knows how many other people who are going through the divorce boom and needed some kind of transcendent mystical experience that maybe wasn't accessible to those of us out in Hendersonville, North Carolina, or wherever we happen to be. And so can you talk to me a little bit about the origin of this book and your inspiration?
Well, I mean, Nietzsche said that once you've written the book, you should not talk about it.
Oh my God, really?
So I'm very sorry we can't talk about it.
Oh,
but no, actually,
he was an asshole. He had syphilis. His brain was cheese by the end.
I mean, Nietzsche is an interesting character, but we don't have to follow him by the letter. So we will talk about Tripped. And the big story of Tripped is that it actually was supposed to have a different title. And the other title was LSD for Mom, which in German is LSD für Mama, which was the incentive to writing this book, because I have been interested in LSD since 1993 when I first took it by accident in a way, and we can talk about that a bit later on because it's quite interesting, and it happened on American soil in New York City. But I never thought about writing a book on LSD. I don't know, why would you write a book on LSD? I mean, right now everyone's talking about the psychedelic renaissance, so maybe it's a good idea to write now a book about LSD, but I was never so pressed to do it. And then I because there's like so many topics you can write about. But I always thought LSD is extremely interesting, so it was always like a hobby of mine somehow to take LSD once in a while or to think about it.
Yeah.
But then I read a study from an American startup company, Eleusis. I never know how to pronounce that name. I think it's Eleusis, which refers to the Greek city of Eleusis and the ritual of Eleusis, which was the defining ritual of ancient Greece, and a lot of people claim that hallucinogenics were used during that ritual. So that company, that American startup trying to develop psychedelic compounds into medicines, named Eleusis, self-named Eleusis, made a clinical study that showed that low, so-called micro dosages of LSD are engaging with patients who suffer from Alzheimer in a positive way. Because it was found that LSD actually stimulates the same receptors. It's the 5H2A receptor, I believe. The very same receptor is stimulated by LSD that Alzheimer degenerates. So actually, and this was interesting to me because my mother unfortunately suffers from Alzheimer.
I'm sorry.
It's tremendous change for a family. Let me tell you that. So my father decided to, and he was a former judge. He had a high position in the judiciary system in Germany, and he was the typical, he's very nice, liberal thinking or leftist thinking man in Germany. We have a little bit different terms, but he was never really engaged in the household because he was working, and my mother was the housewife. It was a very traditional setup in a way. And now he decided to take care of her, and so he does the household. He takes care of her, like he does everything.
How old were
now.
you when this happened? How old were you?
This is about 9 years ago when she started the disease, and now it's obviously progressing.
Yeah.
And the biggest frustration of my father was that there's no medicine he can give to his wife.
Yeah.
Because there is none. And then when he saw that clinical study that I brought to him, he said, "Well, I mean, if it's so effective, why isn't it available in the pharmacy?" Because he believes in the system. He's a law man. He's a judge, former judge. So I said, "Well, I'll bring you the story, and then we can decide whether you want to maybe talk with Mama about using LSD microdosed against her Alzheimer." And he said, "Yeah, okay, bring me the story." And then he explained to me that as a judge, when he was still working, active as a judge, he's now 81, retired for some time, but when he was still working in the state court, he said, "You never know actually what's the truth. You can't see it. You only hear stories. You hear story from lawyers and defendants and everyone." Witnesses, they all tell a story, and you as the judge, you have to make you have to understand what is the most true sounding story, what is probably you have to develop an ear for story. So he said, "You better bring me a good story on LSD." And that's what brought me to this journey of this book, Tripped. So originally the project for me was called LSD for Mama, because it was the research was all about explaining to my father why he can't give a potential medicine to his spouse. So it was quite an intense research journey that led me through archives and meetings with very interesting, also very strange people. So that is the book Tripped. Yeah, I love it.
This thing you went through or are going through is sadly very, very common. When my mom was dying of cancer, there had been...
Sorry about that.
Thank you. There had been a research about CBD helping with cancer, helping with the pain. And in those days, it was still illegal, CBD. Now it's not. They changed the laws. But so I would have to smuggle CBD to...
yeah, that's weird. You just want to help somebody.
You're just trying to help. Yeah. And she would take it and say, "Oh, thank you. This is making me feel so much better." And the frustration that you are feeling is not just because anybody who has a mom who's sick wants to help their mom. The frustration you're feeling is bigger than that, because you are experiencing something that is completely unjust, completely wrong, that makes no sense. Something, and for a lot of us, that just leads to a kind of confusion. The first time you take LSD, if you have a great trip, which I did when I was in high school, and suddenly, if you had a tumultuous upbringing, you're experiencing peace. You're experiencing bliss, maybe for the first time in your life.
Well,
and then you think, this is illegal. This will put you in jail 5 years, mandatory minimum. And it is such a mind fuck to have to have an interiorized experience that illuminates what, at least to me, seemed like a kind of conspiracy. That the power doesn't want us to be this happy, this healthy. And that can send you on a real paranoid spiral.
Well, I call it the chemical wall in the brain that the government set up. So there was once a wall in Berlin. Now we have a wall in our brain. The government says you can only go to this point, but you cannot go further.
Yeah.
Which actually completely contradicts the intro of Star Trek, which I quoted before. Boldly go where no man has gone before. That was for me always like the Western, the free, the democratic philosophy, basically. Yes. So the prohibitionist laws totally contradict that. It doesn't make sense. That that's a weakness within our society, because it's a contradiction that actually affects so many areas of that society and so many people on a personal level. My father also was very much surprised when suddenly he was at the doctor, and then his neighbor called to the doctor and said, "You have to come home. There's police in front of your door." And he's like, "Yeah, this is probably related to it. Like someone had touched his car the day before." He said, "That's related to that. I don't need to come home for that." No, they insist that you come home. So he said he went home, and they were actually investigating him for giving LSD to his wife, because I write about it in Tripped, obviously.
Wow.
And he had been on national German television talking about it.
Wow.
But he knows, he was informed, he knows the consequence. He's a man of the law,
yes.
So he made that choice to be open about it. So he challenges the law. I also said, how can you as a judge challenge the law? And he said, I'm, a human being. I can challenge any law that I think might be unjust.
Wow.
I'm willing to pay the price, So these 4 policemen were there, and they were very, very embarrassed, because he's like the elder statesman of that small town. Like my father's kind of the local celeb,
Wow.
And they were like, Dr. Ohler, we're very sorry, we have to ask you, but we actually have a search warrant for your property.
Wow.
He's like, okay, can I see that? Yes, that's correct. So please come in. They came in like sheepishly looking around. And then they said, well, you said in this interview or in the book that you stored it in the fridge. Could we see the fridge? And he had just, he had nothing in his fridge that day. So we opened the fridge, and they were like, okay, that's enough. And they retreated. And then they actually closed the file. Again, like they dropped the case.
Great.
They dropped the case, and he was actually unhappy about it. He said, I was secretly hoping that I would go to court and stand on the other side.
Wow.
Yeah, he would have loved it, because he's such an expert in the courtroom. He's good in the room. So he wanted. He really. I mean, we could. That could be fictionalized. Actually, it's an interesting. That could be like a short story or something.
What a hero!
Yeah,
that's a hero.
Yeah,
that is so heroic. Yeah. What are in Germany? What are the laws about LSD?
It's not as strict as in the U.S.
Yeah.
Which is kind of U.S. is kind of on Philippines level. So it's kind of third world shit here.
Yep.
I mean, but still Germany follows the prohibitionist laws that were, whose origins are actually a connection of Nazi Germany and the U.S. So we're kind of on the same level here. But at the moment in Germany, it's not as bad, I would say. I wouldn't know if someone is in prison for LSD. Probably, yeah. So it's still bad,
Yeah.
And my father himself had sent people to prison for drugs, mostly heroin, which it's also ridiculous. The prison, there's a prison in my hometown, and it's filled with prisoners, and most of them are drug offenders.
Right.
It's the same in America. What a stupid idea to like put I don't know, 1% of the population behind bars or something.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
really crazy. I mean,
it's crazy. Yeah, it's madness. And it's, but then
this must change. We must have a revolution, a psychedelic revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I think it is going to change, and it's going to change not in the ways that the hippies imagine, which was that, it would like the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, the sort of missionary LSD cultists going around giving acid to anyone. This will open your mind. They would travel through India. One of my friends was in India with Ram Dass, the spiritual teacher, and they were so excited whenever the Brotherhood of Eternal Love would come through because they would give away LSD, and they had the best acid. Or Ram Dass, or at the time Richard Alpert, the LSD he brought to India to give to gurus was created by Owsley. That was a special batch of acid that Owsley made for him. But what I'm trying to get at here is these were academics who realized in the experience that there was something here that was maybe brand new, at least the newest iteration of something that humans have been using for a long time, that was a healing substance. And I think they thought that it would naturally sort of spread through the world and shift consciousness or whatever. But I think the reason you're right about the psychedelic revolution is because it's going to make so many people rich, because now that they have allowed some research to happen and they are starting to understand this could be a prescribable medication for a variety of conditions, that there's money and profit behind it.
I think there would be a flowering of culture and enterprise around psychedelics that would probably transform the society and probably be very profitable for the national economy.
Yeah, and that's it.
The first country that will become like a psychedelically free operating market system will have huge gains, probably.
Huge gains.
Not only commercially, but I think especially culturally, because it will kind of lift off a veil that's like on us right now, that these things have always to be taken in secrecy. So, I mean, there's also something said to secrecy, and I think it actually is kind of a human thing, because I was thinking about the other day how we originate, and obviously the stoned ape theory is interesting.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like you're stuck in this infinite loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air? It's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Bilt Rewards comes in. Bilt is breaking ground as the first rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Even if you pay your rent with checks, Bilt Rewards has got your back. They'll mail the check for you. It's like having a personal rent-paying assistant. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Bilt points roll in. Use points to jet off on a dream vacation. Put your points towards a flight or hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. Use your points to sweat it out. Redeem your points to book fitness studio classes. You can also use your points towards a future rent payment or towards a future down payment on a home. Bilt points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent right now when you go to joinbilt.com/Duncan. That's joinbilt.com/Duncan. Thanks, Bilt.
I lost my train of thought.
No, well, may I?
Because I'm not on drugs. Where was I going at?
This is where you were going. I think where you were going.
Right, the secrecy.
The secrecy.
I mean, we the Homo sapiens, which I call the stoned sapiens, which is actually the title of my next book.
Yes.
It's a New World History. The stoned. We as Homo sapiens, we'd found something that led us to have a cognitive revolution, which took quite a long time, but we actually created a frontal cortex, and we had a better wiring than some of the other, like the Neanderthals.
Yeah.
Or apes. We became smarter over time, and I think, then the stoned ape theory says this is because we, the Homo sapiens, found, for example, a mushroom. This was in Africa for sure. It happened in Africa.
Yeah.
So what plants grow in Africa, what they also grew back then. So a mushroom would be plausible because with a psychedelic mushroom, your consciousness does change. The wiring in the brain changes, and if that is a known thing to a group over time, that group can have an evolutionary advantage. You know, that's a very it makes a lot of sense to imagine it that way. So if you have other groups like the Neanderthals, which you obviously want to keep away from the drug, you don't share that information with them.
Right.
So the drug creates a cult. There will be like a shaman that protects it, and he only gives it to sapiens. If like a Neanderthal is like in the line, like he couldn't be part of that ritual.
Yeah.
So there is something said to secrecy of drugs. They have their, like LSD, because it's secret, illegal since 1966. It has created another aura, which is an aura that is interesting, But I think it's time now that a new era actually starts where these things become legal, and we can actually look at from a neutral, rational, I guess scientific, you would call it, standpoint, like people, brain, like neuroscientists are actually allowed to, and pharmaceutical entrepreneurs and engineers are actually allowed to, work with these compounds in a beneficial way. I think that would actually be better than keeping it a cult.
Here's my cynical take on what you just said. And why I think maybe never right now, maybe never, maybe always a cult. And it's sadly the difference between the underground that we've all experienced and the underground, in your case, the anti-Neanderthal mushroom underground, is that in the Eleusinian mysteries and all of the initiatory systems that had apparently some psychedelic involved in it, is there was an intentionality there, an awareness that this will open up parts of your consciousness that you have never experienced, and then an intentionality. We're opening that up to connect you with the divine, to bring you into the next phase of your personal evolution, whereas the underground that we've all experienced was not engineered by some mystic, but it's just a byproduct of some kind of pharmaceutical fascism, meaning that we're not being invited into the labyrinth or something by robed figures. We're being invited into a labyrinth by people with guns on their belts who will search your dad's refrigerator because he tried to help your mom. So to me, the reason I think that if there is some sort of revolution, we have a lot of fighting to do, is because one of the qualities of LSD is it seems to melt away the conditioning, the propaganda. And, I don't just mean state propaganda. I mean corporate propaganda. If you've ever made the wretched mistake of turning the TV on when you're on acid and you land on the news, suddenly you see how garish and insane the whole thing is, how crazy the people delivering the bad news are. Or a commercial comes on and you look at it and it feels blasphemous. It feels like idiocracy or something, and it's because all of what you've gotten used to has just been melted away, and you're seeing things before you are conditioned. And I think they've put a lot of money into the conditioning, and that conditioning holds default reality as we understand it together, and that default reality is what makes the economies of the world function in the way they do. And that's a lot of centralized power that I don't think they want to let go of. That's my cynical take on it.
I mean, it would be a complete transformation, actually, of the society.
Yes.
I think in the end, society would be more healthy and more wealthy, both.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's bad for capitalism. I think it might be bad for certain unhealthy structures of capitalism.
Yes.
So actually, we really need psychedelic, wind kind of sweeping through that.
Yes.
Because psychedelics, I mean, I was curious because I'm also skeptical about things like sayings like that's what like Leary said, you drop acid and then you're like a good person basically. So that's kind of a moral, it brings something moral into the equation. I think you can be like actually a Nazi and take acid and still be a Nazi.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. So it doesn't. There was actually one study done, but I didn't follow it whether it was so serious. And they said that they showed that psilocybin actually reduces what they called fascist behavior. And I mean, I was curious in these things, like what actually happens in the brain. And I was fortunate enough to meet for Tripped Professor Franz Vollenweider from the University of Zurich, who's, in my mind, one of the leading, if not the leading, LSD scientists, because being in Switzerland, Switzerland not having signed some regulations coming from the United Nations, also regarding to drugs and drugs research. So he could do LSD research already in the early 90s at the University of Zurich, and he did brain scans of people who were who had just consumed LSD and psilocybin. And then he found that you call it the default reality. Well, there's a part in our brain that some brain scientists call the default mode network.
Yes.
So it's kind of like the boss in the brain, or like the organizer in the brain, which is important.
Sure. We
need that to function. That's why it's there. But we don't need it like all the time,
Right.
And obviously, actually, we don't need it all the time. But because what he found is that LSD decreases the energy flow to that center. So like the boss is like, just the volume's turned down like a little bit. If you take like a lot of LSD, it's like
all
turned
the way
off,
down.
then there's no more ego.
I know.
So that's quite rare. I mean, that doesn't happen. Like if it's not like you take LSD and you always like dissolve your ego. I mean, I have dissolved it in a lot of trips, like very, very few times. LSD is not such a crazy drug actually.
No.
I mean, if you we could say overdose it, then you might have a really strong experience where you see like how the cosmos was created, but that's usually it doesn't happen like that. So it's a much more milder thing. So also for my mother, these effects that this Professor Vollenweider found out, they actually worked in her, even though she only took microdosages. So microdoses, you don't really feel it, but you still kind of feel it. And she did feel it, because what she felt was, she felt that stimulation of those receptors that had been under attack by Alzheimer, and suddenly her cheeks would be redder. She would talk with us in coherent ways, which she hadn't been able to do so before. And my father's like, I kind of expected it because I'm like a believer in LSD in a way, but he certainly wasn't. He's a man of the law. But when I came back with the story of Tripped and we decided to give the LSD to my mother, and she also consented, he saw that the story is true in a way. LSD is not prohibited because it's dangerous. It's prohibited for very different reasons, which we will talk about.
Great.
So what actually happens in the brain? Vollenweider finds out the default mode network is lowered down, and the effect of that is that other parts of the brain are able to become more active. So there's also communication between parts of the brain that usually don't communicate directly with each other. They always go through the boss.
Yeah.
So it's a very neutral thing to describe. Your brain is just operating a little bit differently, and that creates different, you have more sensations, you have different thoughts basically.
Sure.
So it's not actually an improvement of your consciousness, but because it's a different consciousness, maybe a little bit different, very, very different, but you're still but you suddenly realize there's more ways to see things,
Sure.
There's more ways to think about something. So I would say, just from looking at Vollenweider's work, I think it does prove, and he would certainly agree, it proves that so-called neuroplasticity is enhanced. Neuroplasticity is the term used to describe the ability of the fluidity of the brain, and it's constantly re-networking. The brain's constantly alive. It's always looking, checking out, learning, getting nutrients. It's like a living organism. So orgasm.
Yeah, it is in a weird way. It's like the universe having an orgasm.
Yeah. So Now I lost my train of thought again because of the orgasm. No, seriously, neuroplasticity is enhanced. That is a fact through psychedelics, and that, I mean, you could also call it healthy, you just call it healthy, or you could also say the neuroplasticity is enhanced. I mean, it's just good for the brain. It's like yoga for the brain, or sports for the brain. So, and in my mother, I could like see it. She would take a drop, 10 micrograms of LSD in her coffee, and then she would just be cognitively more, there.
Yeah.
Certainly. And there were no after effects. I mean, the next day when, we didn't give it every day because you don't do that. Just with like antidepressants, I think you give it every day.
Every day.
So the LSD actually comes before all this, pharmaceutical shit, which obviously is one of these unhealthy structures we talked about. So once the psychedelic medicines make their way into the mainstream, these medicines will lose, and a lot of people who have like stock in companies. But these companies, they should also, go into psychedelic, medicine. So that's how they can balance, what they're going to lose on the conventional side.
Well, hopefully they do. The dream here would be that the same thing happens to them that happens to any person who decides he's going to start selling LSD. The LSD dealer, I read about this, the DEA, on the DEA's website, they were talking about how you could follow the flow of LSD every year into the United States by the Grateful Dead's tour schedule, because like the Grateful Dead, so much acid was sold and transported from the Deadheads following the Dead, like acid gypsies roll into a town. I don't think you say gypsy anymore. Whatever the right word for it, that's what I meant. They roll into a town and they sell acid to all the people who come to the shows. That acid, the sheets of acid, make their way into the small towns, into the high schools, into the colleges. But what happens in the system of distribution as compared to like cocaine or meth or whatever, is the distribution system begins to break down because the dealers are getting high on their own supply. And the more they're taking it, the less they care about making money, and they just want to give it to people. And so it starts melting down our understanding of value and what matters. And so the accruing cash becomes less important than turning people on, waking people up, because they begin to recognize that this is the same thing that all of us have recognized. So my hope would be that some pharmaceutical company starts testing what Hoffman said, which is, if LSD had not been made illegal, he thinks that lower doses would have been the Adderall, because it apparently, he thought it does pretty much the same thing that ADHD meds do at very, very low doses. So that's the idea. Maybe they get lured in by the profit, and then just by it suddenly being accessible to everyone as a medicine, this natural shifting of values happens, which would bring us into the dream that we all share if we've ever had a love affair with acid. And so maybe that's the avenue. I don't know, but I don't want to. I have to tell you this. What blew my mind with your book, and what I somehow didn't know, is that the Nazis procured LSD from Sandoz. Now, this Sandoz being the pharmaceutical company that Hoffman worked at, who synthesized LSD for the first time. Can you tell me about that? Because that really melted my brain. For some reason, my version of it was Hoffman synthesizes LSD, and then LSD, I skipped World War II and went straight to Harvard, straight to the CIA. But could you tell me a little bit about the Nazi experiments with LSD?
Yes, of course. I mean, that is actually what got the book started, or what really, like, for the first time attracted me to LSD as a topic for a book was when I was researching another book I wrote called Blitzed, which is about drugs in the Third Reich, which focuses mostly on methamphetamine for the German army and on Hitler's crazy drug abuse with opioids. So it were totally different categories of drugs that I was interested in. And I visited many archives for this book, and one of them was the archive of the concentration camp of Dachau, and there the archivist showed me test experiments done by the SS on inmates using psychedelic hallucinogenic substances, as they called it, like mescaline and one other tasteless and odorless substance. And I was kind of interested in it and seeing the files, because in Germany everything is written down. Also, people who torture, they will write down exactly what they did, basically. That's the German law for bureaucracy, I guess.
Jesus.
So for me, I'm not a historian, but I was actually a fictional writer before I started writing nonfiction. I kind of benefit from that because I go to the archives and you actually find, the documents, and then you're as close to the truth as you can get, I guess. But the archivist said, sorry, these psychedelic experiments by the SS here in the concentration camp of Dachau, it's super interesting what happened there. He said they're in America, because America, when liberating the camp in the spring of 45, confiscated all, the paperwork, basically, or like a lot of it. Because, that is a normal thing to do, I guess, as a conqueror. Sure. You kind of take it, because they wanted to study, because the Nazis had this nimbus as, like, Germany had this, like, Americans thought Germans are very good in science. Like, they did have top scientists,
For sure.
And the Nazi system was also, kind of geeky about, science and technology, obviously. So Americans thought that the Germans would be quite advanced in certain things, also in bad things. You also learn. Also, America learned a lot from the bad things that the Nazis developed, obviously, because they were immediately again in a war, in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, which was not a fun war. It never became a hot war, but it was like a tense conflict. Let's put it that way. So, what was your question again? I'm so sorry. I haven't even had a coffee. I just want to ask: we are stone sapiens.
Yes.
So we all take drugs the whole day. Is it coffee? Is it sugar?
And
we always need something.
I should have brought you a coffee.
No, that's totally fine.
Or told you to
good.
Get a coffee at the hotel.
You just have to tell me what I was talking about.
I can't imagine doing a podcast without any coffee. I feel like a monster. I feel like I'm the one doing the torture experiment. I should be taking notes. But what we're talking about...
I was very interested in these experiments,
yeah,
obviously. But there was no time to find these documents because I had to go to the US. I had to finish the book Blitzed. So I thought, this is a new book. This is going to be... I'm just going to focus on this research. And I found the documents later on in America, but they're also scattered. It's a bit sketchy, But what is interesting was, to me, obviously the question, that other odorless, tasteless substance. What was it? And I was kind of thinking, will I be able to find a connection between the Swiss Sandoz company and the Nazis? Like, did they sell LSD already to Germany? Because they developed it in like Hoffman found it in 1938, but he didn't really realize what it was, and the mice didn't notice anything.
Yeah.
Because, the mice were just chilling on LSD, and like at Sandoz, they didn't see any effect, so LSD was actually shelved first, and then 1943, he does it again. And...
So how did the Nazis get it? How did they find out about it?
Hoffman never had any Nazi connection, and Hoffman is pretty much written about. He's world famous. He's Albert Hoffman. So when I visited the Novartis archive to find out, is there a Nazi link, or did they buy it? Maybe just from Sandoz. I wanted to find that out. The archivist was a bit skeptical because he was like kind of protecting his archive. So, and he doesn't like, his company to be in bad, to have like bad things written about, which is weird because, for example, the German Bayer company openly says, yes, we invented heroin, we marketed it, and then so they're open about it. But Sandoz, Novartis, but the archives, still, I could use it, and I saw many things he gave me, like the original lab book of Albert Hoffman with his handwriting in it, and that's obviously very impressive. And you see, like, when he takes the first self dosage of 250 micrograms, because he's curious what this is, and at the time the chemists took it themselves.
Yeah.
So he takes the lowest dose he can imagine where he would have any effect, and that's actually quite a high dose because he didn't know how potent it was. So then his marker kind of his pen kind of goes down, he can't write he wanted to accurately write about what happened, the self-experiment documented, and then he couldn't. So that's fun to see. But I thought, then I went up on the mountain at night to visit a Swiss scientist who lives in the mountains and who is specialized on the topic of where did Sandoz actually get the ergot from, because Sandoz was making all its medicines from ergot, and LSD is an ergot-based medicine or compound, you could say. Yeah. So they actually started in the late 30s to grow ergot in the Emmental in Switzerland, which was kind of insane because ergot had been the enemy of the farmers because it poisons the rye. Yeah. It's very poisonous. If you harvest rye, there was some ergot in it. There were mass poisonings in the Middle Ages in Europe when people didn't realize yet that ergot is so dangerous. So Sandoz was actually making this ergot professionally to produce its ergot-based medicines, and they made a lot of money with a migraine. So ergot is very potent. You can make great stuff from it. LSD being one of them, but you can also make a migraine medicine. And there was a medicine against bleedings in childbirth. So they made a lot of money actually on ergots. That's why they had to manufacture it in Switzerland and convince the farmers to now grow the poison basically. And at night I was there with this guy. We were talking about LSD, and then I realized I have to go back to the archive because I need to see the papers of the CEO, obviously, because the CEO calls the shots. It's not the chemist. The chemist is not going to have to connect. He's just the chemist. He made LSD. It's a product of the company. So I went back to and I wrote at night an email to the archivist, and he replied that I shouldn't come the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, because he was busy.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, and he... it has to be taken seriously in Switzerland. If someone is busy, he's busy. He has an important thing to do. Right. And I should please respect that.
Very important. This episode of the DTFH is brought to you by my dear sponsors at Squarespace. Friends, Squarespace is a toolbox that you can use to make a beautiful, powerful website like DuncanTrussell.com. Go check it out. For 7 years in a row, it has won the Global Golden Apple Website Beauty Pageant. Every year, some website thinks they're going to beat it, and they don't, and they cry. But thanks to Squarespace, I get to have a pageant site. I get to enjoy showing my children my mini golden apples, and they're very impressed by that. And the reason that I'm getting golden apples is because Squarespace has an incredible depth to it. You want to do something fast, they have mix and match templates. You want to do something like what you'll find at DuncanTrussell.com, you could do that too. They've got seamless credit card payments for your customers. Also, paywalls if you want to have members-only areas for your content. But what I'm really excited about, and you should definitely check it out, I'm obsessed with AI. So you've got to look at Squarespace's Blueprint AI and SEO tools. Basically, if you've ever tried to create a website and you realize that you have to write so many descriptions about this or that, you have to write paragraph after paragraph, and because it's online, you want it to be perfect, and you realize, I can't. I'm too stoned right now to do grammar. Well, they have fixed this. AI will do it for you now. AI will populate your entire website. Just check it out. It's the first time, outside of making weird art on Midjourney and psychedelic cartoons, it's the first time I've realized how powerful AI is and how quickly, how it can speed up things that for a lot of us are kind of boring and mundane. Go to squarespace.com/Duncan. Try it out for free. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code Duncan to get 10% off your first order of a website or a domain. Again, it's squarespace.com/Duncan. Use offer code Duncan to get 10% off your first order of a website or a domain. Thank you, Squarespace.
And I didn't respect it. What? I thought art is more important. Yeah. And I went there and I was at the archive and he was like, but you're here again? No. What are you doing here? And then, I sat down and he gave me other stuff to kind of distract me. Like he gave me the letters, the exchange between Aldous Huxley and Albert Hoffman, which is, great. I have these letters, like these two people talking about LSD, but that's not what I wanted to see. I wanted to see like CEO stuff. But he said, no, sorry, I can't pull that up. That's too, time intensive, whatever. And then I had to pee, and I went through the archive, and there was an old flag of Sandoz hanging on the wall. Now the company is called Novartis, obviously, but they swallowed Sandoz and another company. So the old logo of Sandoz was still hanging on the wall, and it reminded me of something because a day before, a friend of mine had given me LSD in Zurich, and like the design on the LSD that he gave me was exactly that same old logo.
Yeah.
Like the chemist in Basel, it had also been made in Basel, was like paying an homage to Sandoz and has put that on there. I was like, okay, wait a minute. And I went to the archivist and I said to him, have you actually ever seen LSD? And he's like, no, I have not. It's illegal. And then I said, well, here it is, you can see it. And he's like, whoa, like, but why does it have the old logo on it? I don't, like, for him it was like, became very interesting all of a sudden.
So funny.
And then I said, would you like to have some of it? And he said, but, I don't know. And I said, you can archive it, I said. Then he was laughing, And but he couldn't take it for legal reasons.
Right.
But he was, he suddenly the ice was broken,
right.
And he didn't think anymore that I was like, because he has a lot of weird like researchers there.
Sure.
They're all like focused on LSD, and some might be a bit, over focused, like conspiracy theorists, whatever.
Yeah.
Like so but then we kind of had struck a chord, and so then he said, do you want to see something? I mean, you came again, and I said, sure, I want to see the papers of your CEO, of Arthur Stoll. I said, it's not, I can do that. I still have time. And then he brought me the papers, and then I looked through the papers, looking for the smoking gun. What did the CEO do? Why wasn't he able to, put LSD on the market? Because when LSD was developed within the company, they were very optimistic about it. I mean, they didn't know what it was in the beginning, obviously, because no one knew what it was. Hoffman was surprised himself suddenly to be tripping because, this was the first trip. So how do you know it's a trip? He thought he would go insane, but then after.
And you don't know when you're coming down.
No.
He does not get enough credit for that because anyone who's taken acid at some point will think, I'm never coming down. And if you're with someone who's taken acid, they'll say, don't worry, you'll come down. The first LSD trip, you don't know. No. You don't know what you've done to yourself. You don't know.
Yeah, that's a problem because we don't have education about it. I mean, this should be taught in high school. You know, an LSD trip takes this long. You're not supposed to take it if you have these and these conditions. Right. Be very careful.
Yes.
Maybe even the teacher should take it, with them. I don't know. I mean, maybe it should be 18 years old.
Favorite day in class, acid day.
Acid day. Yeah, maybe that should be a public acid day actually in the United States. People just chill out for a moment. I mean, this nation is so tense. It's so like it needs so bad like a trip or a massage or like a vacation.
And a trip, a massage,
a trip would be very good. A trip would be very good. So I mean, I was looking. I finally had it in front of me, the papers of the CEO, and I was looking through it, and then I realized that there's one person that he communicated with the most, and that person's name is Richard Kuhn. He's a German biochemist, and they had been such good friends because they had the same teacher, and that was Wildstätter, Jewish-German god of biochemistry in the early 20th century, and receiver of the Nobel Prize, Wildstätter. He was this, the bearded gentleman that was like the brainiac, knew everything. And his idea was you can do synthetic chemistry, obviously, but you can also do organic chemistry. So he was for that. He said that the plants have such potent, alkaloids in them. That's where we get the best medicines. Right. And both Kuhn and Stoll, they both, learned this from their master. And Stoll did this at Sandoz. Like he said, the plant I'm going to focus on is ergot.
Wow.
And he made all these. He made Novartis today is based on ergot. Wow. It's based on Stoll's ergot research. And Kuhn was also very interested in ergot. They were communicated a lot about it because it's complicated research, because ergot is so poisonous. Like to extract really to really get, to really turn it into a potent medicine is not easy.
Right.
And Stoll was the first one to be able to do so. And, Kuhn helped him a lot because they were both geniuses, having learned from the genius. And the thing with Kuhn, the problem with Kuhn was that he decided to stay in Germany when Hitler became the Führer. A lot of scientists left. Jewish scientists basically had to leave at one point in time, or they were, put in camps. But also, non-Jewish Germans, a lot left. Also artists left, like Thomas Mann. He got the fuck out of there.
Yeah.
I mean, he was at the time when Hitler took power, not in Germany. I think he was in Switzerland. He didn't even come back. Because he would have been, he didn't want to end up in a concentration camp. And in the beginning, the concentration camps were filled with like leftist intellectuals.
Sure.
So it was, but Kuhn decided to stay because he loved Hitler. That was a movement that he supported. It was a new national, movement that he thought would be good. And I guess he was also an anti-Semitic because National Socialism is always obviously anti-Semitic, openly anti-Semitic.
Openly.
So if you are a Nazi, you're basically an anti-Semite.
Right.
So I guess he was one, which many were, I guess, at the time. He was just one of them. So he worked for the system. He was quite successful, obviously, because he got funding. And he ended his, like when he gave a lecture to students at university, like he sometimes would end with like Heil Hitler, which was or started like, so he would be also a bit open about it, like not super open, but he would like show that he was part of the system.
Heil Hitler is pretty open.
but he wouldn't say it like all the time. Like there's
once is enough.
Once enough. He's a Nazi, basically. Yeah. Once enough. You're absolutely right. But for Stoll, this wasn't a problem. Like Stoll could continue to communicate with the Nazi scientist and also sharing the knowledge. And then when in 1943, they had the most potent substance ever, found up until this day that works on the mind, not on the body. I mean, Sandoz was interested in, finding medicines for the body, basically. They didn't even think about the mind.
Right.
And one of these ergot medicines suddenly was for the mind. And it was LSD-25, lysergic acid, diethylamide. And 25 was because it was the 25th like ergot medicine in that series.
And so then it ends up in a concentration camp. I mean, that is
Well,
sorry.
No. That's exactly what happens, because I see then that they discuss this very potent substance, and then I see a letter dated. I think I sent that to you. Maybe we can pull that up. Or maybe I did send that.
You sent some PDFs for sure.
Well, it's a smoking gun, basically, showing that Richard Kuhn received from the Swiss company ergotamine. And ergotamine is a precursor to LSD. That's a bit weird. Like, Stoll didn't send LSD, he sent ergotamine. So Kuhn could make his own LSD.
Right.
Maybe he wanted that. I don't know.
Probably wanted it.
I mean, I spoke to Leonard Picard about it. I asked him in New York in a cab, what do you think Richard Kuhn did with ergotamine in 1943? Because 1943 was a year when the Nazis were feverishly searching for a so-called truth drug. Because Hitler was paranoid, obviously.
Yeah.
He thought like anyone would wanted to kill him, basically. And there had been many assassination attempts against Hitler.
By the way, shout out to Blitzed. This is the book before this, where you give this incredible history of meth, Nazis, and how Hitler, everyone knew Hitler was like on something, but like I don't think anybody until they read your book knew how high Hitler was all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I studied the notes of his personal physician, which are in the Federal Archive of Germany, and these notes are very extensive. Like Morel, that was the name of the personal physician, was also a bureaucrat. Like he wrote down every, not every, but most injections he gave to Hitler, and also describing Hitler's mood and mood change and change in thinking and what decisions he took after like taking cocaine and stuff. It's quite interesting, and it's very strange that no one had ever really examined this. Basically anyone can find this who goes to the archive and says, I want to see the papers of the doctor. But like in the last 40 years, like only 4 people checked that out, even though Hitler is the most researched person in human history. So that's kind of the story of Blitzed.
It's
which we didn't bring today. We should have brought it also, but people can find it, I guess. But let's stay with Tripped and what actually went down. So I asked Leonard Picard, what do you think he did with ergotamine Kuhn that he received? He received quite a lot, and Picard said he would only do LSD. I mean, it's very easy to make, and the Nazis were looking for the truth drug because they wanted to identify who might be a traitor, who might plot against Hitler. They also wanted to extract secrets from prisoners. Especially Polish resistance fighters had been resisting torture by even the SS and the Gestapo. They couldn't get to the information. So the idea was maybe there will be a drug. And when Stoll reported from Switzerland, we found the most potent, which is, LSD is extremely potent. It became very interesting to Kuhn, and so I conclude that this other odorless and tasteless substance that was used, because then they set up the tests in Dachau, was LSD, which was not named to keep it secret.
Right.
It's mescaline and another stuff, and he just received that from the company that makes it.
Crazy.
So that is the Nazi. It's kind of the Nazi chapter of this strange being called LSD. Like it was a Nazi. Like it was. What they did was in Dachau they slipped it into coffee. And it also LSD has the advantage over mescaline, which they also used. Mescaline is bitter, so the inmate or the test subject that drink, it's hard to give it unwittingly.
Right.
Like why is my coffee so bitter?
Right.
But with LSD you don't notice it. So LSD is in that sense, the perfect drug for a police officer or intelligence officer. But the thing is, then I read one report of what one prisoner said when he had a trip in Dachau. I mean, imagine being a concentration camp inmate tripping on something that someone gave you without really telling you,
The worst.
Because they would give it to you, and then the SS guy would say, like, after half an hour, I know that your mind is, like, he would fuck with his mind, basically.
Oh, God.
So they try to develop kind of this kind of brainwashing, like, really evil, Like, that was the SS experiments in Dachau, and responsible was Kurt Plötner. That's the name of the SS doctor. For him, it was just science,
Yeah.
Like he wasn't he didn't think of himself as torturing. Like he was, but they were using, inmates. They didn't consider them human. They were subhumans.
Yeah.
So that's very grim. These are unethical experiments, and they were supposed to be tried, also included in the Nuremberg trial. But in the end they weren't, which is also what I talk about in Trip. Why weren't they? Because something happened when the Americans liberated southern Germany. They came, they liberated Bavaria. Dachau was in Bavaria, close to Munich. They found the SS reports, and then they moved higher up and they liberated Heidelberg. And in Heidelberg was Richard Kuhn, and American forces had special units with them called ALSOS, ALSOS, and they were responsible to capture and interrogate or interview, you could say, or talk to German scientists in regards to the German nuclear bomb, because America thought Germans would have probably been quite far, being such good scientists as they are. And they had a nuclear program, but it's still kind of obscure how far they actually were. But the Americans didn't know that, so they created this ALSOS unit to find those people, and they interviewed them, and some of them then came to America in Operation Paperclip. So this is kind of starts with ALSOS, and ALSOS also had to look for scientists who were knowledgeable about biochemical weapons. So Richard Kuhn became like a prime target for them. And these were probably very nice conversations as we are having them now.
Right.
You know, they were like, tell us all about it. Like, what did you work on? And
Yeah.
if you tell us what you worked on, you're not gonna be put on in the Nuremberg trial seat. You know, you can maybe even continue your career in America because we value people with a mind. You know, so that
is so dark.
That's the mindfuck of the Americans with the Nazis. You know, and a lot of scientists obviously took it. You know.
Yeah.
And Kuhn took it, and he spilled the beans also on many things like biochemical. Like he developed a nerve poison, so he would tell how that is made. So he was a very valuable client. And then when he talked about LSD, immediately a general, his name's mentioned in Trip, but I don't remember his name but it doesn't really matter. He came flying from the U.S. Heidelberg was the headquarters of the United States forces because it's so beautiful and it's in the center of Germany.
Yeah,
it was undestroyed. They didn't bomb it because they wanted it to make it there. The new like fairy tale Germany, which it is. So it's an interesting time. The Americans in Heidelberg. So he comes to Heidelberg, speaks to Kuhn. Kuhn tells him about LSD. Immediately takes a train. Not to Basel, but to Bern, which is the capital of Switzerland, which I think is a bit strange. But maybe he didn't want to meet Stoll in Basel at Sandoz. Maybe he wanted to be like a little bit away from it. He also was dressing in plain cloth, which was quite unusual for a general at that time to do that.
Very weird.
His wife kissed him goodbye at the station. Like, why are you wearing plain cloth? It's like, and he received LSD not from Arthur Stoll, the head, the CEO, but from his son Werner Stoll, who had become by the time like an LSD researcher and who had done like a therapist. He had given LSD for the first time to patients in a psychiatric ward at Zurich University with very good results. Like he cured like people of depression and all these reports I also studied for Tripped. So he was like an LSD expert. His father, head of the company, he does LSD research. So he meets the general. His father didn't meet the general. And he gives the general LSD. So America then has LSD, like the actual LSD.
Nuts.
And then the American military becomes somewhat interested in it, also as a truth weapon. But I mean, there was a lot of things going on at the time. But they were interested in it, and they hired a Harvard professor called Beecher.
Yeah. Beecher. Beecher, who did work with Kaczynski, who became the Unabomber. That Beecher, right?
Beecher. I don't know. I'm not a Unabomber expert. Actually.
Oh my God! It fits into this timeline in the most sinister way ever. Because, and I could be wrong. Beecher was working with the OSS, and Beecher, in the OSS, was interested in the exact same thing that the Nazis were apparently, which is how do we interrogate people.
Yeah, right.
What's a good interrogation? They were using sodium pentothal, but this is the missing link for me. So this is nuts.
Yeah, this is the missing link that I tried to present in Tripped, because we all know there's LSD and suddenly it's with the CIA, but what happened?
Oh my God, this is Bigfoot. This is because it's so crazy because Beecher, Kaczynski's in Harvard. He got there on a math scholarship, and he somehow gets enlisted by Beecher, who is doing experiments that I don't think he revealed to anyone, especially not Kaczynski, that these are being funded by the OSS. And the experiments probably, and this is pure speculation, but after hearing what you said, were taken from Nazi research that they had already discovered. Anyway, it was about humiliating people, potentially, we don't know for sure, but potentially giving them LSD and deconstructing their personality. Kaczynski goes on to become the Unabomber. Like so many people left Harvard during that time who went on to become notorious people. And it's crazy when you think about that the trajectory of LSD moves out of Dachau to Harvard, to Beecher, to Kaczynski, to Leary, to Alpert, to, all of us. And wow.
I mean, this Beecher, he had been like the drug kind of expert of the military also in the war. And then they sent him these SS papers from Dachau. He was the man to, evaluate them and, And
Holy shit.
And what he did was he basically continued. He continued in Harvard with Americans. And he wrote reports that, I also studied. Like one was called Report on Ego Depressant Drugs, because that's what it was all about, to depress, basically destroy your ego. Which is, the beautiful thing that LSD does. That is what it lowers the default mode network thing. But that is something you do voluntarily,
Right.
So the idea to use it as a weapon is like enticing for a warrior or a bad person or whoever, an American cold warrior at the time, or in the system, So it's interesting for them to really look at this LSD but the military, they were into it, but then who really was into it was actually then the CIA.
This episode of the DTFH is brought to you by BetterHelp. I don't think people realize that when they go on social media, it's a little bit like taking a big cup of water from a river out in the forest when you're camping. Maybe it'll be okay, or maybe you'll be shitting your pants for the next 4 months. Weird parasite is growing inside of your intestines. You don't know. But you definitely probably know that from time to time, you might leave social media feeling depressed, especially if you watch parenting videos, because some of these parents, they're teaching their kids how to do backflips at 2. Their 2-year-old is on a half pipe. Their 2-year-old is parachuting. And you look at that as a parent, you're like, well, fuck, I can barely stand up on a skateboard. How will I ever be that good of a parent? Or whatever it is. Maybe it's the size of your hands. You see somebody's hands and you think, I got little hands. I'll always have little tiny hands. I wish I had bigger hands. You get sick. You get sick because you're comparing yourself to others. And as they say, comparison is the thief of joy. This is where therapy comes in. Therapy can help you recenter yourself so that you're not always looking out into the world. You're not trying to compare yourself to people you'll never meet, who for like 20 seconds of their life are posting stuff on social media. We don't know what's happening for the other 23 hours and 40, I don't know how long. The rest of the fucking day. We don't know what they're doing. They could be throwing puppies into blenders or just laying in mud. They might have a room in their house just filled with mud that they lay in when they're not shooting stuff for TikTok. But it doesn't matter. Once you've been caught, you've been caught. And sometimes therapy is just what you need so that you start understanding what's great about you already. So that you start understanding that just because this person or that person is doing this or that, it has nothing to do with your life and your happiness. Real happiness comes, at least for me, from great therapy. I'm always trumpeting psychedelics or meditation or whatever, but full disclosure, one of the most impactful things I've ever done is therapy. It really helped me. And so I would recommend BetterHelp for you if you're thinking about trying therapy. It cuts out one of the problems with therapy, which is interestingly enough, like the same problem I have with the gym. Anything that like makes you feel better or good long term, for whatever reason, if you're me, you don't want to do it. There's resistance. And the idea of getting in the car and driving to the therapist, there's a lot of room for finding ways to procrastinate there. But with BetterHelp, it's all online. You can do it from your house, which is incredible. You just go online, you fill out a brief questionnaire, you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and they make it easy to change therapists at any time. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/Duncan to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Duncan. Thank you, BetterHelp.
Then comes another character onto the stage, which really gets fascinated by LSD, and this is Sidney Gottlieb, who was working for the CIA and who was the head of the infamous MKUltra program, which has been written about, but I still kind of looked into it because I wanted, to understand what actually what did he do that comes from the Nazis? Like, how is that? Like that's like that origin,
yes.
Of the evil LSD research, kind of also kind of informs then your understanding of what Gottlieb did. And I mean, it's pretty crazy that he would do these unethical human experiments. Then not only at Harvard, like he expanded it to the whole of the country.
Yes.
Like he created safe houses in New York and San Francisco where like people were invited to
Midnight Climax.
Yeah, stuff like that. So that's, yeah, I mean, it's interesting also.
Interesting. This is crazy because here's what I'm an LSD nerd, I guess you could say, but this fills in so many blanks for me because we know that the story before your book, that this is the story probably most of us have heard. Hoffman synthesizes LSD. LSD gets shelved. He self-ingests. Bicycle Day. Then it just jumps right to the United States, skipping over the concentration camps. And the story about it jumping.
I mean, it's Hoffman's decision also because he wrote a autobiography, LSD, My Problem Child, I think.
My Problem Child.
And he doesn't talk about this.
He omits it.
He jumps also. Because he doesn't want to get into it because it's very political and he was in a constant fight with Stoll about this, basically.
I don't blame him because I think he recognized his problem child was going to grow up to be a very like wonderful psychedelic person, and so he didn't want to darken it even more. But I think it's so important, this piece of the puzzle, because it was already sinister anyway. I mean, come on, here you have this incredible ego depressant, as they were calling it, reduces or eliminates the default mode network. And then, if you look at Leary's circuits of consciousness, a lot of people aren't even aware that Tim Leary was like a great scientist and wrote some very interesting theories about the evolution of human consciousness. And so Leary's, and this is paraphrasing, and because I'm an idiot, so I have to paraphrase everything. People say, let me dumb this down for you. That's all I can do is dumb things down. But Leary's idea was essentially the mind is like, in Game of Thrones, the king sends the letter, stamps his seal into the wax. This is the brain, the neuroplasticity stamped into the wax of the human brain of any of us is the imprint of our parents, our culture, and a lot of propaganda. LSD melts the wax, allowing for a new imprint. So meaning that the integration period was very important because after an LSD trip, your brain is waxed again.
Well, it's a neuroplasticity that goes on for quite some time after the trip.
Yes.
So the trip doesn't stop, basically. Your brain is still...
Right. This is why after a great LSD trip, don't watch Charles Manson interviews on YouTube, which I like to do on acid, and I do recommend that. But my point is, based on that, and this is, I don't think anyone is other than Leary has written about it. No one's tested that theory in the way Leary probably would have liked it tested. I don't know, but based on that, you really do have a very desirable substance if you are interested in mind control. Because if I can not just interrogate you, but re-imprint your mind with some new system, then I can now control you. I could theoretically let the fish go, let you go back into your culture or wherever. And this is where the Manchurian candidate-born identity bullshit comes in. So when we look at this as the continuation of some of the most horrific, unethical, fucked up experiments that are on record in a concentration camp. Wow. What a shadowy history. What a skeleton in the closet that you have discovered here.
Right, it's LSD skeleton in the closet.
Woo!
I mean, really before, people at Sandoz, they opened what they called a Rauschraum, which was an intoxication room for their employees to try out LSD, and they didn't have any negative
right.
conception of it. For them, it was something that our colleague Albert Hofmann has developed, and so they took it. They were sitting there and they were, talking about their experiences to a secretary, and these reports, are all there. I quote some of them in Tripped, and they were like, "This is so great. I feel relaxed. I understand myself better." So the
this is in Dachau.
No, this is in Basel in the company.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I got confused. I thought you said in Dachau they had this trip room. And
Actually, it's good that you mentioned it, because what happened in Dachau, and then I'll go back to Sandoz. At first, we finish with Dachau, that story. This Kurt Plötner, this SS doctor, was actually not so happy with his with his LSD tests, because, like, the one report I read was the guy who had received it, and it's a very bad setting to be in a concentration camp.
The worst.
And a very bad set also, your mind, it's a very...
Set and setting.
So it's not good to take a trip there,
Wouldn't advise it.
But he still had a good trip, this inmate, because he was suddenly, like, he understood, there's something greater than what I experience right now. There's a future. I'm connected. Even when I die, he lost his fear of death.
Wow.
So he had a good trip in the concentration camp.
Wow.
Which was obviously not what the SS wanted. They didn't want the inmates to become like, self-fulfilled human beings, you know. So it's kind of funny that, and kind of telling also, this report by this inmate. And Simna was, and this was, these self-tests were done by employees by Sandoz around the same time, actually. Around the same, but
So
obviously they didn't know anything about the concentration.
Right.
I mean, they knew that there's bad things happening in Germany, but they didn't know there's psychedelic experiments in the concentration camp of Dachau.
Right.
Obviously, they didn't know. They were there, they were, Switzerland was, not involved in World War II. Like, there's like the island of peace in the middle of like total chaos.
Yeah.
So they find LSD in 1943, and then they give it to like the bookkeepers and the secretaries and chemists. Like, they could all come to this Rauschraum, this intoxication room, which is like a kind of funny to imagine it, like how it looked. But there's no description. I couldn't find a description. Like, did they have maybe a vase with flowers on there? But like, one guy looked out the window and he saw the clouds and he says, "So beautiful. I've never realized how beautiful the world is." And so they all had very good experiences. That's why Sandoz thought this is a game changer. Like, this could really help, especially in a situation where you have a global war, which will, at one point end and will have so many people traumatized, obviously. So then what do you need when you're traumatized? You need help, therapy.
Yeah.
They thought, maybe this is a therapy that you can just take, which it is, at least, now we kind of tend to think that this actually is like that. And Hoffmann was very enthusiastic about the psychedelic compounds. I found a memo in the archive of Novartis where he writes to Stoll. It's like 1.5 pages. It's quite elaborate, like how he wants to transform the company of Sandoz. He wants to transform it into a psychedelic pharmaceutical company that will examine, not only LSD, but other molecules, everything, the whole field. We're gonna be the creators of these new types of medicines that will basically heal the world with the power of a pharmaceutical, giant, And Stoll rejected it.
Oh, Stoll, what the fuck, man? You're sending it off to the Nazis. You're like, fuck you, Hoffman.
In my book, Stoll is the evil character, I guess, or the antagonist. And I don't know. He was doing weird. Apparently he was not taking LSD himself.
Clearly. So
he was not he was not feeling it, I guess. Right. For him, it was just a liability. And he had been visited by the CIA, by Gottlieb, who had, when Gottlieb received the report from Beecher on ego-depressant drugs, because Gottlieb's job was to win the brain war. And CIA,
terrifying.
CIA Director Dulles had, declared this is the biggest, threat at the moment, Soviet Union, Cold War, brain warfare, war of minds, basically, which was the free world against the communist world, basically. So, and when Gottlieb read the report on ego-depressant drugs, that, you can really, fuck with a person, like, that's what Beecher, concluded after his human experiments.
Those were his exact words.
In Harvard. He really thought it's dangerous that a Swiss company makes this stuff. Like, we don't have control over them. Right. They might even sell it to the Soviet Union. Then there was the rumor, which never proved true, that the Soviet Union had purchased like 20 million dosages of LSD from Sandoz. So Gottlieb got very, he was alert, what if they really develop before we do it, basically.
Yeah.
So he flew with a suitcase full of cash. He flew to Basel. I think it was $200,000. Not that. Well, it's quite a bit in 1950
It's a lot.
or something. And he put it on the table and he said, "I want to buy your world supply. Just give me everything. You have made he had information. You have made like 4 kilograms. That's
Wow.
that I think let's do it." And then Stoll said, "No, we haven't made 4 kilos. We made 400 grams only. Your numbers are not correct here. I'm sorry." And then he said, "Well, then give me but we can increase production for you." Stoll said, "We can make 400 a week if you need it." So Stoll and Gottlieb, they came to an agreement, and I'm pretty sure that Gottlieb also used a bit of, using the strong ties between the CIA and the FDA. The FDA being the body that allows for any company to have like a medicine on the market.
Right.
It's good to not be against the CIA if you want to make business in America,
Right.
I guess. So Stoll understood that. That was for him more important. Because he was the CEO.
Sure.
He's not a psychedelic. He didn't believe in Hoffman's idea. He didn't want to save the world. He wanted to make money.
Yeah.
So he said, "Let's just." LSD, let's just, shove it to the side.
Yeah.
Let's not make trouble with our LSD. That crazy Hoffman. We're gonna do our normal business, and they made very successful business. It became it was an affluent working company. So Stoll was a businessman.
Right.
So that's the old school capitalism, I guess.
Well, yeah, old school. Do you think Hoffman knew that the CIA, that they came and purchased all that? He must have known, right?
Probably. I think so.
Especially if they ramped up production, he would have known.
I mean, that I visited the company now. It's a big company, but they also showed me like the original building where the LSD production was, and like the whole company was much smaller, in the 50s. So the people, you met, everyone knew. I mean, not everything, but I'm sure. I don't have proof that Hoffman knew this. But I think it's quite weird. He doesn't mention it at all in his book. I think he kind of just collapsed, in front of this. He was fighting a lot for it, actually, for quite some time. I mean, they wanted to put it on the market. They were thinking of what should be the brand name. So he was making suggestions, and I mean, he was very into it. He was devastated when LSD, his greatest invention, was shelved, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, Sandoz would still supply it to researchers. That's what they did until 1966, when President Nixon illegalized LSD.
Yeah.
Until 1966, researchers could request LSD from Sandoz and would receive it, but the CIA requested that they were always in the know of,
Who?
Gottlieb. Gottlieb was sitting in his office
Holy shit.
I think first Washington. CIA was first in Washington before it moved to Langley. So he was sitting there, and he basically knew the story. Like, he knew who was researching what,
Well, okay, this is something I've heard about the CIA, which is really quite interesting. So you're at a university, and suddenly there's funding for something. Now, it's coming from a company, with some acronym for a name. You don't know too much about it, but there's a lot of funding to do this study or that. You have no idea you're working for the CIA. You just think it's a company.
That was Gottlieb's genius idea, actually.
Yeah, right. So
his his devilish idea was to manipulate American universities, which should be for free. Should do free scientific research, but I guess that's an illusion, that scientific research is free because there's money behind it. It's the same with like movies. You have money behind it, so you can make actually what you want to make.
That's right.
That's the beauty of literature. You can write whatever you want.
But you
don't need a producer to write a book.
This might be getting a little too esoteric, but this is what your story reminds me of. Persephone. This is LSD. Persephone has to spend like half a year with Hades in the underworld, and then spring comes. This is LSD. It spent some time in the underworld, in Hades, in the power structure. And, because it represents, Persephone, at least spring, it doesn't matter how dark and dead things may seem. Eventually, the flowers start growing. And this is the story of LSD. They couldn't suppress it.
No.
That's the paradox of Nixon. That's the paradox of all of this, is that the intent of all of the men who were manipulating, lying, deceiving, it wasn't strong enough to control this thing. They got into the universities, and then suddenly, just like it's like on a national level, the power structure experiences what they experienced in Dachau, which is like, wait, what the fuck? Like, no, this wasn't our intent. We wanted to find a way to wipe people's psyche or interrogate people, and now you have Tim Leary marching around saying tune in, turn on, drop out. Now you have people saying money doesn't mean anything, and God help us all, people are saying like love is the most important thing, fuck this. And then Nixon steps in and creates the psychedelic dark ages.
Right. Yeah, it was Nixon, unfortunately.
Wow.
I mean, his aide later said that they were really trying to go against the peace movement because they were doing a war in Vietnam.
I'm against the peace movement. Imagine saying seriously saying that.
They said we couldn't really arrest someone for going to a rally because it's kind of a democratic right.
Right.
But we could, make drugs illegal that those people would use, and then we could arrest them.
Right, exactly. And because we're still at this place, unfortunately. In book burning, the Nazis did book burning. Anytime book burning is happening, the censoring of information, anyone with any sort of clear, rational mind sees that as like the beginning of fascism. You eliminate the data set. If you eliminate the data set, then theoretically whatever was threatening you in that data set will just disappear. But because we have yet to acknowledge that LSD, mushrooms, all of these things, what does it McKenna call them? Oh my God, it's the best. Again, dumbing it down, a communication from nature, a communication from the planet, that mushrooms, that marijuana is, that cannabis is in fact one of the ways that the vegetable kingdom communicates with humans. Really? And knowing that LSD has its roots in biochemistry, in something growing on wheat that used to be
basically a mushroom.
Basically a mushroom. Yeah. So to me, the prohibition of LSD was really a kind of national book burning. It was a book burning, but not of a book, but of a data set stored within that compound that has its roots in nature. And so they burned the books that these people were reading that was inspiring a lot of the peace movement. It was censorship, but because it was making a chemical illegal, nobody saw it as that. And it was more tolerable that you could just say, oh yeah, that chemical is bad. If it were a book about love and peace, it would be a different story.
Yeah, I never thought about it as a book burning.
It's a fucking book burning, man, and they're still doing it.
Yeah,
and they're burnt. They're locking the authors in jail. Picard, he wrote a lot of books that many of us read, and they threw him in jail.
Yeah, I don't think democracy and prohibitionist laws go very well together.
Well, not if it's a real democracy, but if you want to pretend you have a democracy, I guess if you want to do make-believe, Ren Fair style democracy.
Maybe in a pseudo-democracy.
Pseudo-democracy, yeah, then it all makes sense. But in an actual democracy, and especially, I would imagine.
But how do we get to that point with that political system? It's very difficult.
Well, I think it's like, this is the most lazy, hippie way to answer that question. But how do you make spring happen? How do you end winter? Spring just fucking happens. Okay. The flower grows from the concrete. Maybe this is what we can at least like place our dreams on. And then simultaneously keep writing books like this, illuminate the story of why. Just give the why and everything else will follow. Because once people, my God, don't you remember, and you probably didn't experience the propaganda we did in the West, but there was something floating around in high school. If you take LSD more than 3 times, you will go legally insane. Now, what the fuck that even means, no one knew. But this is the kind of propaganda that we are getting. And so eliminating the propaganda by showing why that propaganda appeared, I think that puts us in a step in the right direction. And Norman, now you really do have to go. Friends, this is my dream book. And thank you for writing it. And thank you for coming on this show. It was so nice getting to chat with you.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Norman Ohler, everybody. You should also check out his conversation with Rogan. I got lucky because he was in town to do the JRE and he had time to do my podcast. But if you want a long form conversation with Norman, he just went on Joe's show and you should definitely check it out.